The fact is that the last 8 years with George Bush has been something of a constitutional Chernobyl. Every safety feature in our system seemed to fail. We had a complete meltdown. It's not supposed to happen. The framers designed the system to be effectively idiot-proof, and God knows we put that to a test. And the system failed. Why, with clear impeachment questions, haven't the Democrats moved forward with impeachment, making any sizable instead of just rhetorical motion? Because to impeach this president would raise into question clear crimes like surveillance and torture that Democrats were aware of and said nothing.
What used to be institutional tension between the branches has transmuted into partisan tension. There's no institutional impetus for one branch to question the other when that branch is controlled by the same party. And if that doesn't change big time in 2009, I think we're in for more of the same. There has to be an educational campaign because members of Congress show up, they have no idea what the separation of powers is. They think, because they see the president on television, that he's in charge of everything.
Just 10 years ago, at polling data, the global view of the U.S. was relatively favorable. You could go around the world and you'd find, generally speaking, that the opinion was very high. The BBC poll that was conducted earlier this year was devastating. In 18 countries, only 29% of the publics have a positive view of the U.S. 67% of the people in those countries see the U.S. as a violator of international human rights, citing especially Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, the secret renditions of people for purposes of torture and interrogation itself. 70% of those polled in these 18 countries see the U.S. military presence in Iraq as provoking conflict and violating international legal principles. And finally, another poll conducted by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs shows that majorities in 13 countries on all continents say that, and I quote, the U.S. cannot be trusted to act responsibly in the world.
President Bush has violated the Constitution, violated the laws. This has not been on a random basis. This has not been on a trivial basis. It has been on a systematic basis. It has been across the spectrum of laws. We do not know today all the ways that President Bush has violated the laws and the Constitution of the United States. One of the things that President Bush succeeded in getting Congress to do was to make the War Crimes Act of 1996 retroactively inoperable. This, in essence, was a pardon for himself, for Vice President Cheney, for Mr. Rumsfeld, for everyone at the top of command, as well as others who engaged in mistreatment of detainees. There are two laws that affect the mistreatment of detainees. One is the Anti-Torture Act, so since we don't do torture, that doesn't apply. But there was the War Crimes Act of 1996, which was designed to implement the Geneva Conventions. And it made cruel and degrading treatment a federal crime, not a crime to be prosecuted in The Hague, but to be prosecuted here in the United States. And if anyone died as a result of the mistreatment of detainees and the violation of the War Crimes Act, there was a death penalty. And what did that mean? That meant that there was no statute of limitations. And what did that mean? Anyone who ordered, authorized, directed the mistreatment of detainees in violation of the War Crimes Act, when somebody died, would be subject to prosecution for the rest of his or her life, like murder. They were very worried about this administration. Mr. Gonzalez advised the president about this problem. Just before the Congress was about to change, the administration persuaded Congress to change the War Crimes Act, retroactively making it inoperable, going back to the date of its passage. When Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, it cost him the presidency. When George Bush pardons himself and his whole team, plus others, you don't even read about it in the newspaper. I don't think many members of Congress even know that this has happened. We've had a major assault on our democracy. And in my opinion, there's a fourfold agenda. Number one, we have to find the facts. We have to find the facts about how the president drove us into a war through deception and lies and exaggerations. We have to find the facts with regard to the mistreatment of detainees, which some of which he's admitted and acknowledged. We need to understand exactly what happened with regard to FISA. We need to enact remedial legislation. We have to deal with criminal accountability. The War Crimes Act is a criminal statute. Resurrected, the president and his team can be held accountable. Even under the Anti-Torture Act, the president and his team may be held accountable. And finally, I believe that the remedy of impeachment must be invoked.
Whatever the ultimate remedy may be, it's going to be one that will come both through the people and through the Congress.
We have a political system that is functionally brain dead. The EKG on our system is flat.
When we did the only successful impeachment effort that's ever been undertaken, the only one that has withstood the test of time, did not start with a count of the Senate votes. It did not start with a count of the House votes, and it did not start with a count of the Judiciary Committee votes. The Congress understood, because the American people were demanding action, accountability was the word, process was fair. They bent over backwards to accommodate the president. They bent over backwards to have it bipartisan. The Republicans had a Republican counsel. The Democrats had a Republican counsel. That's how it worked, and it won public support. The tragedy is that these leaders do not believe that you can win public support because they have become so cynical about democracy that they want it all arranged beforehand. They're not willing to educate. They're not willing to let the process work. In fact, the process united the American people, even though it only got to the Judiciary Committee. And it was bipartisan, and it won huge support, even to this day.
I believe this president should be impeached. But none of that matters in terms of Congress's responsibility, specifically the House responsibility. They took an oath. They know that this president has violated federal law, has committed knowing and repeated federal crimes. That should be the end of the debate. You should go back to that Congress and say, who the hell gave you the choice of carrying out your constitutional responsibilities? You took an oath to carry out your responsibilities.
I've worked on truth commissions internationally, and it's always struck me as a remarkable fact that we do a very bad job, with the exception of the very good job that was done by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974, in looking back and taking account. And I think if there is one central theme in Common Cause, and a theme I think that will appeal across a very broad political spectrum, it's the theme of understanding what happened.
There's going to be a huge pressure for the new administration to move on, to forget the past. This is all going to be viewed as focusing on the past and not dealing with the problems of the present. But we can't really deal with the future until we restore the constitutional balance. So I hope that Common Cause will help to resist that pressure to move on.